So folks, Reverend Liz Walker, pastor of Roxbury Presbyterian Church, is now going to come forward, and she's going to lead us into this next piece of the work. And again, we'll get to talk, I think, a bit more specifically about education reform, parent choice, and things that are going on here in Massachusetts. Reverend?
You're going to be on our panel, right?
Of course.
Good morning. We want to continue. We know that we are full of information. It has been an amazing morning of learning. But I'm going to call the panelists up who are going to continue this conversation so that we can get started right away. We hope you won't leave. Kara Stillings Candle. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Close enough.
Jeffrey Riley. Carlos Rojas Alvarez. And of course, Kenneth Campbell. And we're going to talk about perhaps Reverend Shuttleworth's legacy and where we are today on policy. We talk about choices. We talk about, I loved Mrs. Shuttleworth's statement that it wasn't a pro or con issue. It's not pro charter versus pro-traditional public school. It's pro-good education. Unfortunately, the conversation has become polarized, just like everything else in this country has become polarized. We are living in a polarized era. And I have so many responses to so many things that were said, but let me just first say, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas around the time Reverend Shuttlesworth and Dr. King and all of that was going on. I grew up in the shadow of Little Rock Central High School. I was in the first grade when that was desegregated. So I have witnessed most of this as a child, and as a child who was inspired. As a journalist, I have tried to make most of these issues pro and con, black and white. And that's what we do as journalists, and I think that we have done a great disservice to many of the changing and transformative issues in the world as it is being borne out right now. I am a minister now, so I can look at this also from that perspective, and here's part of the problem. Part of the problem, we've made God too small. Now, I can jump into a sermon any moment here. It doesn't matter if I only have one person, just me, and a mirror, I can preach. Reverend Shuttlesworth, Dr. King, that era saw an urgency because the urgency was obvious. And so they fought on an urgency. They fought because their backs were up against the wall. They fought because it was a life or death situation. We live in a culture today where most of the issues have become entertainment, and we watch them on television, and there is no urgency. You see, that's why we ended up with the man we call 45 who's in the White House now, because we live in reality TV time and we have no urgency. It's entertainment. I'm not involved. Well, the chickens have come home to roost. Our backs are against the wall, and somebody better look at this with a sense of urgency. My church is in a neighborhood of the least and the lost and the left behind. My children who come to our tutoring program are immigrants whose parents can't speak the language, our children with emotional problems, our children who are fighting, have to walk through violence just to get to school, our children who just face all of the most serious problems in America. They are the least, the lost, and the left behind. So while many of us are saying, oh yeah, Massachusetts has done it, oh no, not by my children. They can't read, they have no math skills, and they are going to school every day. There should be a sense of urgency on this. We are still leaving some folks out. Let me introduce to you our panel to discuss where we are right now. And I'm ambivalent, and I know y'all didn't call me up here to preach, I'm sorry. Don't invite me back again. But I'm ambivalent about the issue of pro this or pro that. I would say that Mrs. Shuttlesworth has the answer, and it's pro good education. And somehow we've got to stop the us and them thing. Let me just thank you for the amen. Let me just say once again, our panel includes Kenneth Campbell, who is the Louisiana Executive Director for IDEA Public Schools, one of the nation's leading charter management organizations. Jeffrey Riley, the Superintendent Receiver of the Lawrence Public School District. Prior to taking this role, Mr. Riley served as Chief Innovation Officer at Boston Public Schools, overseeing creative approaches to academic student achievement. Carlos Rojas Alvarez graduated from Boston Latin in 2012 as a high school student who is an undocumented American. He became involved with the student immigration movement. And Kara Stillings-Candle, an education researcher and writer. She's a senior consultant for research and curriculum at the National Academy of Advanced Teacher Education and a senior fellow at the Pioneer Institute. So welcome and thank you all for this, which I believe is a conversation that should have a bit of urgency. As we have just heard, Reverend Shuttleworth's civil rights leadership model is incredibly compelling, a different era, but educational opportunity is often called the civil rights issue of the 21st century. So my first question, and I'm going to pose this to all of you, is to respond to this lady's statement about the reality versus the perception. Does Massachusetts have it all worked out? Are we the model, or do we have challenges as well as the rest of the country? And I'll start with you, sir.
Oh boy, okay, thank you. We absolutely...
You have a mic right there.
I've never needed a mic before. Good morning, everyone. We absolutely do not have it all figured out. The problems in our urban areas in particular are not being addressed sufficiently. I am a superintendent of the Lawrence Public Schools that was placed in state receivership, and when I went there, there were problems, but the way we decided to do things, to fix things, was together, with parents, with teachers, with charter schools, with the teachers union, with everybody. Because at the end of the day, the only thing I do know is that parents don't care. They just want a good school for their kid. They don't care if it's charter, public, innovation, traditional, they just want a good school for their kid.
So, Mr. Riley, thank you. Carlos, I'll go right to you. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we get past this polarized kind of atmosphere?
Well, you know, I was thinking this morning about what I wanted to say, because there's so many angles to this debate, and one angle that I think Carrie and I have been locked into for such a long time is this pro versus anti, this side versus that side. One of the most interesting things that I figured out on the Save Our Public Schools campaign, Carrie worked vigorously on the Yes on Two side, and I worked on the No on Two side, is that we were oftentimes in the same neighborhoods talking to some of the same parents. You had a parent and her sister or her brother who were working on either side of the issue. And something clicked for me there where I realized that this conversation post this ballot question could not continue to be about, are you with this or are you not? That framing seriously mischaracterizes the issue that we're facing here. And it, I think, mischaracterizes people on both sides of this debate. Like I said, for full transparency, I was the student field director on the Save Our Public Schools campaign. My job was to organize and work with young people in Boston and across the state to defeat ballot question number 2 and to uplift their reasons why they would want their parents and the adults that were heading into the voting booth to vote no on question 2. And I think that honoring their voices, I have to let you know that things aren't perfect in Boston. And the achievement gaps are wide. Young people, and I can see this even with myself and my younger brother, I'm an immigrant from Colombia. I came to Boston in 1999. My mother escaped Colombia for one reason, which was to provide me an education, something that was not possible in 1993 in Columbia, and we came to Boston, the cradle of public education. And here I found the Agassiz Elementary School in JP, the Hennigan Elementary, also in JP, the Timilty Middle School. And if it had not been for one teacher in the 5th grade who bought me an ISEE practice book and paid out of her own pocket to send me to 10 ISEE prep sessions, I would not have gotten into Boston Latin School. But I got into Boston Latin School, and from the 7th to 12th grade, I experienced an education that 99% of students of color in the city do not experience. So there's a lot of work to be done around, and I have a younger brother, and I've seen his educational path, which is a different path from mine, and I've seen the disparate experience. And I've seen what makes good education and not good education. I've seen that in my experience and in his experience, and so I'm excited to be here today to share that in the hopes that we get to acknowledge that we understand there's the same problem, and the challenge is that we see different solutions to that problem. And I want to make sure that both sides of those solutions are uplifted, because I think they have more in common than the narrative will allow.
Garrett, did you want to add?
Sure. I don't know that I have too much to add. What I'd like to say is I appreciate Carrie's statement, and I think that, there are a lot of things that Massachusetts does well. I want to acknowledge one of those things, but let's definitely not hide behind achievement gaps. And I'm very happy to hear you mention Boston Latin in some of the papers that we've written for Pioneer Institute over the past year. One of the things we point out is that when you look at, for example, high school performance in Boston, so much of what overall Boston looks like is masked by the high performance at many of our excellent exam schools, right? So there are achievement gaps just within. So does Massachusetts have it figured out? Absolutely not. But one of the things that Massachusetts has done well, which has allowed us to think with all of the social capital that we have in this Commonwealth. I mean, I grew up in the Detroit area, and school opportunities are very different for children in that area as well. But Massachusetts has been a leader in, at the state level, sort of gathering data and accountability, which allows Carrie to stand here and say, hey, we've got kids in Dorchester who can't read, right? And so that's something that Massachusetts has done really well, and I would argue almost to a fault. And as, I was also a supporter of Question 2, of Yes on 2, and I've been reflecting a lot in the past few months as to, wow, how did we get it that wrong, really? And one of the things I keep coming back to, I think, is the point that's already been made. Schools for parents, to Jeff's point, are an emotional thing. Right? You just want, I have an 8-week-old at home, so I'm very emotional all the time, right? You just want the best for your kids. And when we lead constantly with data, which is so important, we fail to understand that parents and families and communities need to connect around their schools. And I would say that that's one thing that's been missing, certainly from the conversation around school choice. But it's also just missing more generally in our approach to thinking about best fits for kids, right? So what is school choice at the end of the day? Well, the what works for my kid might not work for your kid, and what I want for my kid might not be what you want for your kid. And let's figure out how to have the best educational opportunities for all of our kids. That's what this should really be about.
Have any wisdom for us?
I'll just add very briefly. I think it would be a mistake for us to believe that this conversation really is about parents and what they want or kids. It really is about adults arguing with adults who have two very different points of view. And they're very seldom connected to the mass of parents out there who are going through this experience. They may teach their kids in one system or another system, but at the end of the day, this is an argument between, people who believe, ideologically very different things. And it's not so much about parents. And in fact, I would argue that parent voice has been left behind, very often in this debate.
Anybody wants to respond to that? The parents being left out? Mr. Riley, of course, Lawrence has a good reputation. You have done a lot of good things on reform. What would you say, first of all, what advice would you give us based on the Lawrence model that other schools can learn from you to reform schools? This issue of parents. You said it doesn't matter to parents where their kids, what we call the different schools, as long as they're tell us more. Could you give us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to say I'm loath to give advice to any other school or school system, and I mean that in all sincerity. I feel like what we did in Lawrence was what we thought was going to work for our community in Lawrence, and that plan may not work in Boston or in Holyoke or pick another city in the country. But what we decided was that parents, when we first got there, were kind of left at the door of the schoolhouse, and give us your kid. We'll give them back to you at 3 o'clock. And that was very different than, my kids go to the Boston Public Schools, that was very different than the schools that my children went to in Boston, where parents were welcome into the school. And maybe that's not the case at every school in Boston, but at my kids' school it was. And when we went about making changes in the district, I kept 90% of the teachers because I felt like they were great, good, or working to improve. I cut central office by about 40%, put that money back at the schools, but I replaced over half the principals because they weren't welcoming to the families. And the only way this really works, and at least for us in Lawrence, is we decided to do it together. We brought in all those different factions and said, we're going to do this and focus on the only thing that matters, which is our kids. And parents have been a huge driver of that. We have a PTO President's Council, which is like a revival meeting I go to every other month, and they meet on the off months to figure out how to do better by their schools. This is an amazing group of parents that were besmirched when I got there, when everyone said the parents don't care about their kids in Lawrence. That couldn't have been further from the truth. The parents weren't allowed to participate. They have to be allowed into their kids' education. They may not know how to help with algebra. I'm forgetting myself how to help my son with algebra. Just to put that out there. But don't tell me a parent doesn't care about their kids.
Oh, yeah. Right. So what can we...
I'd just like to comment as somebody who's been looking at Lawrence and writing about Lawrence and highlight one of the things that Jeff said here, and you can push back on me if I've totally got it wrong. But there was actually an article in yesterday's New York Times, right, about the power of a principal and the power of school leadership, and friends were forwarding it to me, and I was like, well, that's no big shocker, right? But it seems to me that, you said you replaced principals that weren't on board with your way of doing things, but my assumption, Jeff, is that you also gave people that you trusted a great deal of autonomy because you had accountability in place to make sure that they were going to do the job right, but that there wasn't sort of a micromanagement going on at the school level as long as folks were engaging with parents in the way they should and getting results for kids. And I think that that's part of the power of what we're seeing in models that really work. So if for example, in Massachusetts, we do have these good structures for accountability, why then would we micromanage school leaders at the school level if they're getting the work done?
Well, I just want to say I agree with almost all of that. I just want to call it, what we do in Lawrence is more like loose, tight administration, where we do give the principals and the communities at the school level a lot of autonomy to get the job done. With that said, it's not a complete free-for-all. If you're struggling, we provide more support. If you're free to run free, we let you run free. Many people know that I was a principal in Boston for a long time, and I spent a lifetime evading and ignoring the central office. But I could do that because I had the results that mattered. And so I think what we have to do is find people, the right people to lead those ships who can work with the teachers, parents, and kids to build a great community. And so we've gone from one level one school to 10 because of that model where we are pushing distributing the leadership down to the school level, but you got to have the right people in place.
Yeah, I just want to say, after the elections, I was very curious about what lessons I could learn, but also what lessons generally we could all learn from the results of the ballot initiative results. And, I sat there thinking, we were significantly outspent in terms of campaigning. And when we started the campaign, the polls showed, in fact, that Yes on 2 would comfortably win. And then I realized that the one out of the 3 top issues that really moved people was parent engagement. That people were concerned that there is not enough parent involvement and decision-making in charter schools. And I want to say that the concern applies in many ways to public schools as well. And that says something to me about not just what we value in our schools. It's clear that Massachusetts voters value a democratically run public school that involves meaningfully parents, but that's actually one of the solutions to our problems. And it seems so simple, but it's true that when parents are engaged in their child's education, the children do better. What goes wrong, I think, is racism and classism. Because when you have low income parents of color, like my mother, who is an immigrant to this country, struggles with speaking English, you can't send a flyer home and expect her to show up just like that. And certainly not if you send it in English. You have to be able to figure out how to engage populations of people. My mother does not have the agency that an affluent white suburban mom has. It's fact. And I think we have to figure out how to do that. And my point is that I think all of our schools, charter schools, and public schools have got to get smarter about parent engagement. And I think the studies need to help as much as possible reinforce that fact that you have to be able to support schools to be able to do that effectively.
Can I just add that when I was a child, and this is old school, I know this is probably irrelevant, but my mother was a teacher, second grade teacher, desegregated schools, and she taught in the county. And she would get in her car, my father's car, and the whole family had to go out and knock on doors and meet the families. Because the families were poor, they couldn't get to the school. So it was almost the same kind of dynamic you have now. But you see, the difference was my mother saw teaching as an avocation. It was a calling. She had a responsibility, and I think teachers feel that way now. But how do we get them? You know, and in Roxbury, where I am, and I'm right on, our church is right on Warren Street, and we're surrounded by a lot of turnaround schools. And some of the teachers will tell you, well, I can't go to that neighborhood because there's a drug problem there, or there may be violence there, and they're scared. So how do we get past that part of it? I open this to any of you. That's just on the ground reality in urban communities.
Well, one of the things that I've been excited about recently is community schools. And I started reflecting on my educational experience, putting Boston Latin aside, but that's a big factor. My elementary school experience at the Agassiz in Jamaica Plain and the Hennigan Elementary in Jamaica Plain, what I realized was happening at those schools were that there were community school models being implemented that weren't called community school models, but in essence they were. What I mean by that is that students were being, and parents and families were, and communities were being supported in the way that they needed to be supported. Those schools were not just drop your kid off to learn, send him back home without taking into consideration the social and economic factors happening at home and in the community. So for example, when I needed to do something in the summer because I was 9 and my mother was working, the school helped me find a summer program. I found Wheelock Family Theater and became an actor on a scholarship. When my mother couldn't figure out dental insurance for herself, my school counselor helped her figure out going to the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center until she had dental insurance. So I think community school models, which frame schools as hubs and centers and grounding of community, I think is really, really important because it helps us to tackle the issue that you can't just implement suburban or affluent school models in low-income urban schools. Schools have got to see themselves as centers of community, and of course they have to be supported in order to do that. And I hope that in a little bit we can get into the issue of school funding, which is a big factor in the way that schools are even able to implement such models. But I think that's going to be really important for us to look at is the way that schools don't just see themselves as a place of education, but are able to see themselves as a place where families can get help. And if schools have help, parents will come.
Yeah. I think there are certainly places where I think that's important, but I think there are far too many places, as Reverend talked about, where folks are afraid to go out into communities and make the school true community schools, and that's unfortunate. But I think that's just the reality, and I also think that it's important that we, in particular with school leaders, I think, help them to understand that their job is not just to be an instructional leader, but I think it is to be an advocate for children. And I think too many of our schools don't have leaders or teachers who advocate, for our kids. And certainly when you look at performance, we have some schools that love kids to death but can't teach at all. And that's just as bad, in my opinion, right? So I think that adds to the complexity of this work. But it can't just be everybody feels good. And even, there are great schools, there are schools who have, health centers on campus, and we can do all that stuff. But if you can't teach, that's a problem.
Yeah, I'd like to just build on that too and say, to bring us back to, one of the reasons we're here, innovative school models, yes, absolutely, give us more, right? But part of this too is about parent choice. So if you want parents to be engaged in the education of their children, then give them the avenues to make meaningful choices for their children. And understanding that there's a big difference, Carlos, between to your example, your mother's ability to understand the choices that are available to her, right? And in a place like Boston, you have one kind of choice. And for example, me as a pretty prototypical white suburban mom, living in Brookline and sending her kid to a private school, talk about choice. That's, but having choice just at the outset, especially if it's facilitated in a way that makes choice meaningful for folks, can be an effective tool, an incredibly effective, maybe the primary tool for parent engagement. Now we can talk about what effectively facilitating choice looks
That's the
like
next question,
and
yeah.
whether we do it.
That's the next question. So how do we facilitate it so that it's meaningful?
Oh goodness, I just wanted to pose it. I didn't know if I wanted to answer it. I think that we have a lot to think about here. In the Massachusetts context, we have some communities that do have good choices for students. And when I say good choices, let's talk about what meaningful choice is. I worked in Chicago in the era of No Child Left Behind, and I was working at a shelter for homeless youth, and the mothers would come to me and say, so I just got this letter from the school district, and my kid's school is failing, so here are the other two choices that I can go to. And you look, and those schools are failing too, right? So what's a meaningful choice? And also, meaningful not just in terms of academic performance, which is really important, but as a friend said to me the other day, I'm looking for a school for my kids. Do I care about test scores? Yes. But what I also really care about is my daughter has special needs. And is she going to have those needs met? So having distinctive school options. And I would say I probably hammered this home on these panels way too much. One of my big fears is that in Massachusetts, we've done so well with accountability that we've forgotten about the other side of the coin, which is autonomy and distinctiveness and giving parents real choices. Yeah. And so to be able to facilitate choice, you have to have real choice exist in the first place. And now I'm going to let you take it.
I just think at the end of the day, we already have choice in America, right? People with money and power exercise choice every day.
Every day.
Right? So we shouldn't act like choice is some big, scary thing.
Yeah.
Right? The only reason it's scary is because now we're talking about giving poor people some power and the ability to choose. Because people with money choose every day. They choose based on where they buy their house. They choose based on the private school tuition that they choose to pay for their kid, whether that be a religious school or not. They choose when it comes to people with power, because there are poor people with power who figure out I could go to Representative so-and-so and they can get me into this school. So let's not act like choice is this big scary thing. It's only scary because now what we're talking about is giving poor people choice.
Let me pose this. Did you want to say something?
I did.
Please.
Because I think I think what you said is really important. That choice has to be meaningful. And I know this is one of the last questions in the list as well, and I'm touching on this just a little bit. But I think about the kind of choice that Secretary DeVos is advocating for. And I think about 2 weekends ago, I was in Chicago with parent, student, and teacher organizers all across the country that are coming together to effectively come up with a campaign that rivals the Secretary's campaign. Because when she says school choice, we don't have to look any further than Detroit, Michigan, to see what she means by school choice. There is plenty of choice in Detroit. Many, many charter schools to choose from in Detroit. The issue is quality. The schools are abysmal. So when we talk about choice, we have to talk about quality choice and meaningful choice. I talked about one of the 3 pillars that I think helped to win the No on 2 campaign. One was the concern that there was not enough parent engagement in charter schools. The second pillar is, and the data shows this, charter schools, even in Massachusetts, where I think they do a lot better than in most parts of the country, are not educating the same kinds of English language learners and are not educating the same kind of special education students as their public school counterparts. And I think people realize this, and I think that's an important thing to think about when you're talking about school choice. I work with a parent, Malika, she is from Dorchester. She came to one of our meetings way before the campaign started, and it was a great meeting. And then she raised her hand, and she said, is it normal for a child to be a kindergartner to have been suspended 22 times in a single year? And we said, no, that is not normal. And her child was in a charter school where we also know disparate school disciplinary practices happen, though our public school counterparts are in no way guilty-free of that practice, but there's a difference. And you can see that in the data. And I was actually preparing for a panel during the campaign, and I just went on the DSC website, and I looked at school disciplinary data from, I believe, 2015, and the difference was there. Neither school system is perfect, but the difference was there. So I think that when we talk about school choice, yes, my mother had a choice between 5 to 6 different public schools, and we chose. My mother sent me out of East Boston, where she did not trust the public schools, and sent me to Jamaica Plain, a wider and more affluent neighborhood that had better schools. But it has to be a meaningful choice, and it has to be a choice for all parents.
Kara, I know you wanted to respond.
You know, this is such an incredibly complicated issue. And I am a hypocrite, and I want to be very upfront about that.
Please.
My children go to the Boston Public Schools. I had choice about where to send my kids. Didn't really work so well with that lottery system they had in place, but I'm told it's improved since then. But as a district leader, we have neighborhood schools in Lawrence. And maybe it's because there's still a part of me that tilts at windmills, but when I was a principal in Boston of a middle school, I remember a lot of my kids, their parents didn't have the agency to make those choices. I had 2/3 second language learners. I had 1/3 special education. And I remember getting kids from charter schools after October 1st being sent back to me because it wasn't working. And I understand the need to give parents choice. I get that. Parents want to, this is about fairness, right? I just worry sometimes when we have choice that not everyone gets to actually make a choice. And so when that happens, how do we educate everyone so everyone has a fair chance to make a choice if we're going to go down that road?
Kara, I know you wanted to
Jeff,
respond.
yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more with, figuring out how to better inform all parents of the choices that are available to them. And Carlos, with all due respect, if we're going to move forward and have a real conversation about getting past yes versus no, Your numbers are a little bit fuzzy around. I mean, okay, so I'm on the board of St. Anna Hill Public Charter Schools. We're 37% special education in New Bedford. Please come visit our campus and tell me that we don't have, the same higher special education enrollment than the surrounding public schools, because we do. And these are conversations that we could have. I think the data are increasingly clear that charters are serving at parity or close to parity the types of students that in the Commonwealth that district schools are. But I don't think that should actually be driving the conversation anymore. This should be a conversation, to your earlier point, around quality and how are all schools doing a better job or the best job that they can of serving all students. And choice can be a huge part of that, right? I mean, parents of special education students have more choice than any other parents, right? You can get a voucher to send your student to a private institution if your student has special educational needs, right? So I think that making this conversation about charters are bad and have high suspension rates, which some charters need to work on their suspension rates, as do some district schools. But making it this black and white conversation around charters versus, as we've done in this Commonwealth for the past 20 years, is so unproductive. And, let's talk about, Jeff brought Phoenix Academies into Lawrence. Now, they're not operating as a charter in Lawrence, is my understanding. But there was something in that model, that was working. And maybe you'd like to speak to that more, Jeff, because I'm just throwing you out there, right? But there are ways to think about this where we can facilitate parent choices, help parents make good choices, really inform parents, and still have a system that flourishes with distinctive options.
Can I just respond to that? I agree with you 100%. So I want to clarify my thoughts, because when I said public schools are also guilty of discipline practices, I meant that there are public schools that are also not doing right by students. I know this because I work with Boston Public School students who are being suspended from their public neighborhood school. But I think Jeff hit it a little bit better than I did, which is that, but let me make, these are my words, but what Jeff said actually resonated with me, which is that if you're going to fight about choice, you cannot ignore the quality of choice. And oftentimes this conversation about choice happens separated and devoid of context from the kind of choice that is being offered to parents. At the worst extreme, let's talk about choice in Detroit. There is plenty of choice. Choice has not improved the educational outcome or quality of those schools. There's lots of charter schools to choose from, very low quality. In no way is that happening in Massachusetts. I think that one of the things that we can be a bit proud about is that the charter schools here are highly accountable to the state, as are their public school counterparts, and are doing a good job relative to charter schools in other parts of the country. But I think when we talk about choice, you cannot divorce that from, okay, what choice does a recently immigrated Guatemalan mother have in East Boston, where the local public neighborhood schools, which year after year, by the way, are getting budget cut after budget cut, are the ones disproportionately serving the very high need ELL population, right? Because if you're in the schools and you understand education policy, you'll know that there are different levels of ELL students, right? There are high proficiency ELL students that need minimal support and services, and then there are ELL students that have just arrived in this country and can barely speak a word of English. When you dive deeper into that data, what we're seeing in East Boston, for example, is that there isn't actually as much choice for Latino parents as is being presented. Because if you have a child who is high needs ELL, that child does not have a choice to stay in one of the charter schools that operates in East Boston. In fact, they are likely to end up at a public neighborhood school that is losing funding year after year. I know this because I work with parents in East Boston who have often talked about the lack of support for their child at the charter school versus the public school. So when we're talking about making public schools better, all schools better, and when we're talking about offering choice to parents, which we don't disagree in any way whatsoever, we actually have to talk about the quality of choice that's being offered and the equity and access for all parents.
Could open up more charter school seats.
Ken, did you want to, do you want to open this up, Jamie, maybe, and let everybody be involved? Let's not have a free-for-all, though, but we can do that. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Do you need a microphone?
No, that's okay. I think everything you're saying is wonderful, that we need a new conversation where everyone gets together to decide the best quality education for our kids. What's no one's saying is that is not possible when one side of the equation is legally protected in everything they do, and the other side are parents who have are subject to the legal restrictions that the other side has in place. And I'm talking about teachers union. Lawrence, I don't think your schools aren't all teacher union schools. And I think that maybe I'm wrong, but it's not a level playing field when all the parents are bound in their actions by the contract that the teachers and the teachers union have. Because you come up against that, and you come up against it, and you can't go anywhere unless the contracts are amended. So until the teachers union says, okay, boom, contracts out, let's all sit together and get quality education for our kids, it's not going to happen because it's a direct opposition between the teachers union that governs everything they do and protects them in every single way versus parents who do not have that ability at all. So that's the little dirty secret that we're all talking around, I think.
Well, well, a few things. So my great-grandfather, Henry Brides, worked as a shoemaker in Brockton. He married Ella Kelleher, my great-grandmother, who was born in Lawrence. He rose to become the president of the American Federation of Labor, which I don't think many people understand. I've always worked inside a union-based system, while a lot of my friends went to run charter schools, just because I wasn't sure that all kids were going to be serviced by those charter schools. I do believe that there were problems with teacher union contracts. I've always fought with the teachers unions and then found a way to work with them. I did have significant authority when I was granted receivership in Lawrence to set aside all teacher union contracts if I so chose. I did not do that. We did agree, however, to a smaller contract, more nimble, but we also asked charter schools to come in and give up their charter, give up the lottery, take neighborhood kids, and all work under a unified umbrella and be unionized. So the union has been demonized.
For the choice, the teachers knew that they weren't going to have the protection of that contract. So it was able to make the dialogue a little more open than it otherwise would have been.
I definitely had a hammer at my disposal.
Yes.
And
Well, the parents don't have that hammer.
I understand. What I'm saying is, look, there's been a lot of demonization of the union, and I have fought with them for many years and made up with them. I had this at my disposal, but I chose not to throw away collective bargaining rights and some, because I believe teachers need to have some representation too. Had it gone too far? Yeah. I believe it had gone too far, which is why I created a system where they still had rights, they still had some representation, but it wasn't kind of the craziness that was involved in the BTU handbook, which is 500 pages written in .2 font, right?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna let Ken, and then there's a gentleman back there. Ken, why don't you?
I think the challenge is even greater than that, right? Because it's not, and I'm not an anti-union guy, but I want to be clear that what we're up against is the organized interest of adults versus the interest of kids, right? Because education, let me tell you, I tell people this all the time. I feel like, I don't know how it is in Massachusetts. I lived here a couple of years, but my son was so young, but in most places, education is controlled by like the 5 families. It's like the mafia, for real. It's the teachers union, it's the principals association, it's the school boards association, it's the bus drivers, and it's the athletic association, right? No, I mean, totally serious. Those 5 organized interests of adults control this whole thing. And they like the status quo pretty much the way that it is because they can divvy up the pot and they know how to negotiate, right, to get the small pieces that they need here or there, right? And so in reality, that's what parents are up against, right? This whole thing is the organized interests of adults versus parents and kids. And that's difficult for them to ever come over.
Yes, the question I have is about vouchers. Are vouchers something that any of you, to private and religious schools, that is, any comments?
Many comments. Why don't we start with you? Okay. Please.
So yeah, so I'm a big supporter of vouchers, provided that there be some level of accountability. In Louisiana, we have a voucher program. That program, and so there are a couple things though, right? So we try to lump all vouchers together, right? In reality, all those programs are designed differently. So there are voucher programs that give parents like $2,000, and then they want to say, well, it didn't work. Well, you can't educate anybody for $2,000. So in Louisiana, what we do is we try to give parents real money, right? So they get either the per pupil or 90%, right? But in return, the schools who accept voucher kids have to take the state test, right? And then those schools that don't do well get sanctioned on a regular basis. So what we found is some of the private schools aren't nearly as good as everybody think they are, because they're not, but some are even better than we thought they were. And at the end of the day, it facilitates parents to have meaningful choice in places that they believe speaks to them. And where I'm from in Louisiana, some of our kids need Jesus all day, every day. And so if we could give them a voucher to a good religious schools that provides them a quality education, I'm down.
Yep. I mean, as I just said, mom lives in Brookline and sends her kid to a private school. If I didn't think vouchers should be, I think that would be incredibly hypocritical of me. But to your point, so what we need, the last question for our panel had to do with the new Secretary of Education and what we thought of per voucher. I mean, wowza, right? Accountability. How are we doing it? What does it look like? You can't just have a willy-nilly plan that says, yay, vouchers and choice, and not think it through. So money to religious institutions, yes, if we have the appropriate balance of accountability and autonomy, then I see that money, as in almost every other industrialized nation, as going to the family and to the kid and not to the religious institution. We're like one of the remaining countries. My dissertation was on like what school choice internationally that has this hang up, right? About like, oh, goodness gracious, separation of church and state, which is not the right interpretation, by the way. But it's also about for whom. Who's going to, how do we create programs in the places where they work? We're talking about means-tested vouchers, to your point, where parents have enough money to spend on an education that is good, and also where the supply side actually exists. So again, to the point about meaningful choice. So if we're going to do this, we need to do this really carefully.
And I think we have to always keep in mind that choice cannot be an end, right? It's a means. Right? It's a means to get to that educational quality that everybody talks about, right? So it's not an end state. It's not we're doing this to create choice, right? We have choice to facilitate parents being able to get to better schools regardless of what we call it.
Right here, sir. I don't know if you need a mic, but I'm sorry.
I can try.
Okay.
Thank you. My name's Rick Porteous. I'm up from New Bedford. And my question relates, thank you. My question relates to segregation, equity, access, and innovation. And my perspective is shaped by a number of experiences. I come from 3 generations of public school teachers. I've taught in a variety of public schools. I taught at Boston Latin briefly. I live a block from City on a Hill, New Bedford, and pass it probably once a day. Teaching was my second career. I started a charter school in Hyannis that, according to U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek, and the Washington Post, is the top-ranked public high school in Massachusetts consistently, year after year. Massachusetts has a wrinkle in its charter school law, nothing that should be blamed on Senator Birmingham. He didn't put it in there, which says that the neediest students in Massachusetts are prohibited from having possibly the best programs. It works this way. If you're in the bottom 10% in terms of statewide testing, then there's a proven provider requirement that gives tremendous advantages to existing charter school networks and works against true innovation done independently. The program that works so well in Hyannis on the Cape and is being emulated by 3 districts in the surrounding area is the International Baccalaureate Program. Over 4,000 schools in 142 countries. One of the most advanced professional development programs there is. A heavy commitment to inclusion and equity and excellence. It cannot pass muster in a district like New Bedford. It's against the law. And I'm curious what the panelists have to say about that wrinkle that's been added to the charter school law in Massachusetts that limits choice and limits quality and keeps it from all families.
I've written a lot about this, and I couldn't agree more with you that the proven provider clause absolutely limits innovation and limits choices. And you know, it's a product of the political climate here in Massachusetts. So Race to the Top comes along in 2010. Yay, let's do anything we can as a charter movement to open up more seats in this Commonwealth where we have incredibly high-performing charter schools but can't seem to expand them. And I would say that it's a different conversation. It's not solely the fault of the other side. I think the charter movement needs to really look within and try and think about like what we've been doing and where we should be going and the kinds of schools we should be offering folks. But when it comes to offering a distinctive new school, you can go to some places and try and do it here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but you have very, very little incentive to do so because of the proven provider clause, and that includes, you know, serving the kids who need distinctive options the most. So, couldn't agree more.
And I would hope that that's something that we all support. I mean, you come back to school choice. I don't know about that, and I'm really interested in that. And I've also heard of your school, so thank you for having done the work that you're doing. I've heard of that school, and I always remember that school. And I always remember a couple of in-district charter schools in Boston when I am set up again on this pro versus con, because I want to acknowledge the work that some charter schools are doing. But again, school choice. My younger brother is a sophomore at Boston Community Leadership Academy. A few years ago, it won the bronze medal for best public school in the country. You have a inner city public school competing with the best public schools all across the nation. My brother enrolled 2 years ago. And the first year that he arrived at Boston Community Leadership Academy, and please, by the way, look the school up. It was founded by the woman who, an incredible woman, who took her vision for good public schools, made it happen within the Boston Public Schools, and it rose to the top. Last year, it was set to lose $900,000. It was set to lose close to $1 million in funding. What that meant for my younger brother was losing the librarian. So he effectively now goes to a school where there are a few books on the wall and no librarian. That meant losing several AP classes, one of which he was very interested in taking. It meant losing a big chunk of their special education program, and that really hurt me, because this is a top public school that, by the way, also figured out a beautiful way to include special education students, which doesn't often happen. This year, in this round of budgeting, it's set to lose close to $100,000. So when I think about school choice, I think we also have to be very real, that unless our conversation about solutions also talk about expanding the pie, we are working within a zero-sum game. Unless our solutions also revolve around expanding the pie and making sure that there is equitable and full funding for all of our schools, we are playing within a zero-sum game. And that has impact on the public school students and parents that everyone in this room wants to advocate for.
I'd like to add on to that. There was a statistic that came out a couple years ago from the Southern Education Foundation, which said, for the first time in decades, 51% of American public school kids are living at or near the poverty line. 51% are now eligible for free or reduced lunch. Backing up a little bit, I would say what you're seeing is the dissolution of the middle class and the American dream as being played out in our politics these days, where a lot of the anger comes from, whether that's Trump, Bernie Sanders, or what have you. But if 51% of American public school kids are now living at or near the poverty line, and we as a country don't step in and do something beyond which model is going to work, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, I try to have a collaborative spirit. I understand the problems of the teachers union, but I guarantee you this, the only thing that's going to fix this country is if we stop investing in the stock market, great, the housing market, great. But imagine if we took that kind of energy and put it in the next generation of kids and said, we are screwed, but we'll give our kids a chance to make this country great again, right? That's the only thing that's going to fix this. And until we have that kind of spotlight shown on education, some of this is just rearranging the deck chairs or a zero-sum game, as Carlos says.
How much money was spent on the charter versus on the cap? $45 million. I'm just saying.
What I could have done with 1/45 of that.
Thank you. Would you have a question?
Yes, I do. My memory was that charter schools began in order to be kind of like laboratories, to come up with the best practices within schools, and then to transfer what was learned within the charter schools to the public schools. And that step seems to be missing. And I'm just wondering what can be done to do that, to strengthen public schools for all children whose parents might not have the agency to choose what's best for their kids and have only public schools available to them. And I think that is the part of the population that really needs attention. So just wondering if anyone knows.
Got any answers to that? That train has left the station.
No, I don't think it has complete. I mean, I think superintendents like him, right, and other folks can do this. But I think it's the same way that you think about parent engagement, right? There has to be willingness on both sides to have those conversations and not close doors and not they're the enemy. And, you know, in Baton Rouge, we have a saying that they're all our kids, right? They're educated in a charter school, traditional public school, wherever they are. They're all our kids. And in my mind, that means we should all be concerned about them and where they're educated. We should be able to have better conversations about the best places for them to be without getting hung up on, you know, I don't like you because of what you do or the kind of schools you run. That's BS in my mind, right? So we need more people like this gentleman and other superintendents who say, whatever we got here, we're going to use everything at our disposal, every tool to make sure our kids get a quality education.
Can I just ask a real quick question? Up until 1990, the amazing engineers in Germany built a horrible automobile called the Trabant. No one's probably heard of it, right? Because it was a government-run automotive company. Next door in West Germany, you had BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen, etc., who operated by free market principles. What we have here is really a breakdown and a failure of government to run good operations. It's an inefficient system, and it really stems, I think, and Superintendent Riley, you know, has the autonomy as a leader, doesn't have to really report to a board. But what we have around the country, St. Helena, I spent time in Louisiana, in a third world school district, St. Helena Parish. I've been all over the country working on choice and charters. And what we have in this country, for those of you who don't spend a lot of time in urban areas and other parts of the country, it is a disaster. and nothing that's bad here in Massachusetts even pales in comparison. Holyoke and the challenges of Lawrence, nothing compared to what you see places like Flint and St. Helena and many other cities around the country. It is an absolute disaster, and the common denominator is that democracy. Look, I mean, I hate to say I'm anti-democratic, but what we have is elected school boards beholden to the 5 mafia families that thank you for pointing that out, these special interests that run these local schools like a fiefdom. They're feudal lords. They employ their friends and their neighbors and their cousins and et cetera, and the kids and the results are really, sort of secondary. And these are employment centers. And I was just in Montgomery on a panel on charters that my colleague Safira talked about, and we had this exchange with local district people precisely about this, and their only opposition to charters, this is brand new down in Alabama, was that we're going to challenge them on jobs. So what we have here is really a broken system of public education, and until we get around this idea of government-run operations that are inefficient, too costly, and Carlos talks about lack of money, Newark spends over $23,000 per student. 23, I don't know what Boston is, but Cambridge is like 25,000. It is absolutely ridiculous, and the results aren't really tied into the amount of money being spent. I think we need to rethink our approach and bring privatization in, and all models should be allowed. So I'd love to get your thoughts. I know Betsy DeVos is really, obviously as a leader, there's a lot of polarized views on this, but I think if we can't get away from this government-run monopoly and start thinking about things differently, I think we're really in trouble as a country, and especially when we get to the civil rights aspect of this, because if you look at the kids who are stuck in these failing schools, they're not white and they're not middle class. So
yeah. Thanks, Jose. So a couple things. First of all, I've been around long enough that I've seen horrible schools run by the private sector and horrible schools run by the public sector, right? I don't know that removing the government from this is the right answer. And there are some places where I just think, the private sector, from a morality point of view, should have a role, but the question of what that role is and how it looks, I think is something that we need to debate. I just think that's a big, much bigger issue than just this, this piece.
Well, I'll just say that I'm a big fan of democracy. I'm sorry that you're not. And I believe the government desegregated our public schools, didn't they?
Yes. I wouldn't have gotten a job in TV if it hadn't been for the government. That's all I got to say. It's affirmative action. Yeah, I remember that, but it worked. Where are we? This could go on. This is wonderful. It's obviously a lot of conversation. I think we should get all sides together, and that's part of it. And I thank you for this. This was important. We thank you all for being here. We thank our illustrious panel and all their expertise. And we have much to do, but it looks to me like we're up to the task. Thank you, and have a great day.
No, you're good. So Jamie asked me to just make a few closing comments, and I love being able to do that. I don't get to Boston that often. My son was born in Cambridge, which is really interesting, right? Because he lived here like for 5 minutes, but he thinks he's really from Boston. So, stuff happens. And no, seriously, like after the bombing, he was like riveted to the TV. It's like, this is where I'm from. I'm like, dude. Anyhow, so I do enjoy the opportunity to get back here. And I think these conversations and these debates are debates and conversations that we're going to continue to have, because they aren't easy issues and there aren't easy answers to these issues. I think I want to leave folks with one thing that's been on my mind a lot lately, which is, we talk a lot about education as the way to transform the lives of students and families. But I also think it would be a mistake for us to believe that education is the only thing that's important to our families. And we're in a climate right now today where, on one hand, we want to go out and we want to say we need to give parents more choice. And there are people who support that, passionately. But then on the other side, we want to cut money for housing and health care and the things that are going to make those kids be able to be good students. Because I know, and I have people in my family and people in my neighborhood who will tell you that if you are hungry, you cannot concentrate in class. If you don't have heat in your house, if you don't have a safe place to live, you cannot do well in school. So I have a lot of concern about part of the debate right now that looks like it just wants to be micro-targeted on this one small piece, while on this other stuff we want to say it doesn't matter. And I think it affects those of us who support parental choice in a big way, because what it means is we will start to lose allies in this work. Because I can tell you right now, I cannot go to a parent and say, vote for this person because they will help you on education, but they're voting for all the other stuff that you need in your life, and that's going to make your family successful. I just think, folks, we got to think about those things. If we want to start having a conversation about equity, about fairness, about dignity for people, right, we have to understand that it's all interconnected, and it's not one slice at a time. And that being said, thank you for being here. Thank you, Jamie and Pioneer. Also, book signing outside, so please get in line and do that. Thank you.